Good morning, everyone. This is Rachna here, the CEO of the Graduate Students Association at the University of Melbourne. It's wonderful to be back on the grad chat program with parents. And this, in fact, I hear is a challenging week for some of our parents because we have our children returning back to school. And I understand the prep and this grade 1 as well as the school children in grade 10, 11, and 12. Some schools have got them back into the school campus. So it must be a nerve-wracking week for parents to get them back onto a schedule. So we do have a very good speaker with us today, Professor Erica Frydenberg, who is going to join us and provide some tips on how to handle the situation. So before I commence, I'd like to pay my respects to the Aboriginal people, the traditional custodians of the land, on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I want to pay my respects to and acknowledge the past, present, and emerging leaders, and also recognize that today is the beginning of the National Reconciliation Week. And as we discussed on Monday and yesterday, it's a very important week in the history of our country. And the importance for each one of us to acknowledge the pain and the suffering of the stolen generation, and how through this reconciliation, each one of us have a role to play in supporting the healing process. So I would love to, at this point, invite the Associate Professor Erica Frydenberg, who is with me today, once again joining our session. Thank you so much, Erica. Erica is the Principal Research Fellow within the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. She is the clinical, organizational, counseling, and educational psychologist with extensive experience practicing in educational settings before joining the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. She's authored and co-authored many books, psychological scales and chapters and publications, and really focusing on how to cope with skills in managing young children, adolescents, and adults, with the aim of helping people to thrive in their personal and professional life. So Erica, thank you so much for once again joining our grad chat program. We have had you come the last time and talk to our parents, and I noticed from just before I caught on to the show, when I was looking at the recordings from your previous show, we've had quite a significant number of parents or people who have just jumped on, and I myself found that session very, very helpful. And today she's going to talk to us about families coping and setting boundaries. I understand we have our attendees joining us slowly, but I think I'd like to welcome all the attendees. It's also an opportunity while the session is going on. Please feel free to send your questions to me on the chat, and I will be able to put that forward to Erica, or you can ask her, and because she'll give you some time in between the discussion. So welcome on board, Erica.
Thank you, Rachna, and I'm very pleased to join you in the grad chat and share with you what my experiences and ideas are around this topic. I was asked to talk about setting boundaries and limits, and my reference will be very much the area that I work in is around families coping, because it's often the mutual consideration that's important. If you Google boundaries or limit setting, you will find lots and lots of traditional information around setting limits and boundaries on Google, on YouTube. So what I really want to do is to take somewhat of a different slant, hopefully still answering your questions, but giving you some useful tools that you can use beyond this session and throughout the years of your children, whether they're young, they're middle childhood, or even maybe adolescent. So it's general principles and tools that I want to work with. Our first slide is really just to say, I think we're in the end of autumn, but very soon it will be winter. So Families Coping is the book that I sort of run parenting programs with Dr. Jan Deans at the Early Learning Centre at the University of Melbourne. And this is a book that we use as a workbook in those programs. And in that book, I've really put all the things that I think are the core principles of good psychological practice, but how it applies to parenting. But often what I say to parents is that the principles of good parenting, good communication skills, good living together, working together, are the same principles that I would be saying as an organizational psychologist in the workplace. It's the same principles that I use to train school psychologists. So really these are useful life tools, but hopefully you'll be able to apply them to your relationships with your children. But what you'll notice as we work through the slides is we don't really want to have a book of rules, the rules of the family. It's really how families work out situations together. But one important thing that's not on any of the slides, but I did mention it on the previous communication or webinar, was that really social learning is one of the most important features in life. You as adults, your children are really watching everything you do and are learning from what you do. So a lot of the practices and the behaviors, whether it's eating correctly or talking to each other with a thank you and please, these are the practices. So children just watch parents, they watch their teachers, they watch adults. And so really you've always got to be sort of stopping and saying, hey, what am I doing as a parent to show the good practices that I want my children to do? Because really living in a family is not about just setting rules and being a police commandant who makes sure that everybody sticks to the rules. The family is a collaborative, a cooperative. Okay, the thing that I always start with, and a lot of professionals these days start with, is the positives. And the positives are, what are your child's strengths? Always be looking for your child's strengths and acknowledging them. So I'll just quickly go through what I wanted to achieve today, is to make the point of looking for strengths. When you're setting limits, it's about making your children feel secure. Children need limits. They do need boundaries. They do not want chaos in the family. Limits make them secure, but they have to be limits that are sensible, worthwhile, age-appropriate, situation-appropriate. We want to be looking like we're thinking about strengths. Always try and catch your kid doing something good rather than breaking the rules or the limits. Let's talk about what are unacceptable limits. The unacceptable limits, or hard limits as some people call it, are when something is absolutely non-negotiable. Running on the road is non-negotiable. So there might be a very clear limit. When we reach the road, we have to hold hands if we're talking about a young child. So there are unacceptable hard limits. And when they're hard limits, you have to be assertive, and we'll talk about assertiveness. Setting behavioral limits, the things that might be important, and negotiating some of those limits, problem solving. And even with children as young as 3 and 4, negotiation tools can be useful. And the last one is talking in a soft voice versus a loud voice. That's actually the last slide that I'm going to be talking to later on, but I might actually just tell you it's one of the things we always learn from each other. So parents learn from each other, and I learn from parents. And a parent of many, many children said to us, they had children of very wide-ranging ages, from preschool going on to adulthood. And what they learned as a couple is that when you have fun, you talk in a loud voice. And when you're disciplining and wanting to be assertive, it's best to be firm and use a soft voice. So when you notice your voice rising to a crescendo, stop and think about it. So getting into the habit of using loud voice for fun and soft voice for discipline or enforcing limits. Okay, this is just the strength slide, which I wanted you just to see that really there are so many ways your child can have strengths, whether it's being friendly, kind, giving, brave, creative. So what this slide is really just trying to show you, and I guess you can read it faster than I can, so I'm not going to read it to you, but to just say that you really need to think about, what is my child doing that's right, and acknowledge it. So really, there are many, many ways your children have strengths, but keep looking for the strengths, because often when we're talking about things like limits and boundaries, we're talking or thinking in our minds about discipline. And what I wanted you to do is just to start thinking about, what is good that my child is doing? How can I acknowledge that good? And there are so many ways that they are always doing good. Okay, there's the notion. When in Victorian Education Department many years ago, there was an edict that we were encouraged to catch a kid doing something good. Now there's, I thought, a very nice picture of an older sibling sharing with the younger sibling and putting their arms around the child, and catch a kid doing something good. Hey, Joe, I love the way you've playing with your brother and helping him, or showing him how to water the plants, how you put your arm around him. So this is the way you can acknowledge the positive, and you've noted it. Really, family life, like most relationships, are a bit like a bank account. Having a lot of credits in the bank is going to be helpful for you. So when you've got this developed good relationship where you've shown approval, you've recognized good things, you're much more likely to have the child come on board when you are setting boundaries or limits.
So Erica, that takes me to a question, which is, I think often parents, as students or as working parents, you have limited amount of time, and that limited amount of time often, I think, goes in, talking to children about their chores and tasks, and trying to get them to complete or either compete, that is there. So is your message to say, I think that consciousness of appreciating the strength in your children, it's a conscious kind of behavioral change for a parent, which should be watchful about, isn't it?
Absolutely. And at the end of this session, I'll show you an image of Professor Lee Waters' book, which is called The Strength Switch, where we're really trying to turn on a switch in our thinking, look for the positives, looks for the strength. But, when you're talking, use the word chores, when there are a list of things, and in a lot of families we have got this sort of list of things that we want children to do, make sure that when those things are listed, there's also ticks attached to it or approval attached to it. And teachers know all this. They will give a smile, they'll give a nod of approval, well done. Or let's see, we've got through 3 of those tasks today. That's really good going. Can we do the 4th one? So always not just looking at lists, but showing the recognition that we're working towards success.
Thank you,
Okay.
Erica.
Children can test the situation. They can take charge by being determined and demanding. So all the limits, rules, or boundaries, all the rules can be often challenged. But the point is to be made that children do need some rules. They feel safe when adults know what they're doing, rather than the children taking charge, ruling the roost, which they really don't want to do. So it's very important that we talk about limits, some hard limits, some limits that are essential, but parents being in charge. And that's another very big a message that we give, that you want to be able to feel that you are in command of the situation, because that child needs you to know that. Okay, know what is important. What are the things that are important for you as a parent? Getting ready in the morning is often an issue for parents, so we can get into the car on time, get to the train on time, get to school on time, get to kinder on time. So know what is important. So making rules or boundaries around things that are important. And what's important for your child. But so when you do make rules, you do need to give reasons. We need to get our clothes ready for tomorrow so we can get dressed quickly and be on time for kinder, and mummy can get to work on time. Or maybe daddy can get to work on time. So basically giving reasons is important. Age and stage of development, everything isn't age appropriate, okay? Holding hands with a 3-year-old when you're crossing the road is a rule, is a hard rule, and is totally age appropriate. But as children get older, they want more and more independence. So you might be sort of crossing the road with a different set of rules. Let's just walk together. A 6-year-old, the issue might be how much television or technology that they use. And this is really a constant cause of concern. And I know for many parents, it's a cause of concern, because whilst we've been in lockdown and homeschooling, there's been a lot more relaxed attitudes towards screen time, and you may wish and need to be changing those rules. So negotiation could often be very helpful there. And for a 14-year-old, it might be how and where they go. So really, really the illustration there is that the same rules don't apply all the time. And I don't know if any of the audience have children of different ages, but in very simple terms, families often decide what is the right bedtime for the 4-year-old versus the 6-year-old versus the 8-year-old. So ages and stages are important. But I've just put a little thing there, is everything can be seen as a problem that has a solution. It's how we arrive at the solution. Making expectations clear, whether about mealtime, bedtime, schoolwork, technology, etc. So once you've decided what is important for your child, making that very explicit. Sometimes there's room for negotiation, and each child is different, but children do like to barter. Can I have another 15 minutes? Bedtime is at 7 o'clock. Just one more book. Okay, so it is good to set a rule, and for very young children, it can even be how many books you're reading to them before they go to sleep. But be clear, be firm. Often you can negotiate even those things before you start, so you don't get the one more, a bit longer scenario. It's not a battle, it's a problem to be solved. So I think it's one of the adages or the sayings that you often hear for parents is choose your battles. That means that I think I'd like to reframe that. Choose what you are firm about, and maybe, not think of the word battle. Think of it as a problem that we've got to solve. Being assertive, and we'll talk about it, is saying I messages. The you message is often a blame message. You didn't tidy your room. You didn't make your bed. You didn't get ready on time. You didn't eat that meal nicely today. You is a blame message, and we want to get to the I messages. That's what we'll be talking about. Giving reasons. The I message always gives a reason, and it starts with the statement I. Okay, so here's an example, and I want you to sort of think about an example that's relevant for you, but the child's letting go of hand while crossing the street, and the consequence for that is you're worried that the child might get injured, you're feeling worried, and the child isn't safe. And what you might say to the child, I feel worried when you let go of my hand as we're about to cross the road because you might get injured by the cars. So can you see there, the statement starts with an I, and then you give an explanation or a reason. Or you might not start formally with an I, but it's still the same message. When you let go of my hand as we're about to cross the road, I'm worried that you will be not safe from cars. So the message is, here's a situation, this is what's worrying me. And so you can start with the I and give a reason. Okay, can you think of a situation that might be age relevant for you? What is the problem that you're concerned about? What is the consequence that you had to set the limit? And what's the reaction or the feeling that you have? I don't know if you've got any in the chat, but it'd be lovely if someone thought about a situation where they
I think probably what I thought would be very good to discuss now is, children getting back to school, because I think this negotiation about having a routine back in school where they get ready and, in the mornings about the wake up time and the sleep time, and, how we actually communicate that with the children, and being able to say that, often I think the biggest question I've heard parents say is, why can't I just be at home? Why do I need to go to school again?
Yes, and I think that came up last time. A lot of children have been very happy to go back to school. A lot of children have been ambivalent about going back to school. And there have been some children that there've been a few tears at the gate, pretty much like the first day of school, because it's been such a long break for some of those children. I think really, apart from the child who's very reluctant to go back to school, and I think that has to be handled sensitively and with some reassurance that it's been such a wonderful time working at home together, and lots of parents have also enjoyed it. But let's work out a way to get back to school. But overall, I think, Rachna, from your question, it's let's think about what is the schedule of this family, because really we've had to have some schedules during lockdown if children were being homeschooled, but it's been much more flexible. And all of us have been more flexible with our behaviours, whether it's getting dressed, getting ready. I know that some young professionals have said how much they'd love not having to put on makeup for the day. So we've all had to make changes. And that's another good parenting tip, to be sharing with your child that we've all had to make changes. We've all had this free or more relaxed time and we've enjoyed it, but now it's back to a routine and reminding the child of the routine. Now, for the children who've had their first day at school, we often prepare them for that first day back at school. So really saying, this is the time that we have to go to school and this is the time we have to get up and these are the things we have to do before we get going to school. So having these conversations with your child and getting them to appreciate the wake up time, the getting ready time. The getting ready time is often a problem for parents with young children, and you do need to think of individual strategies. So it's, once again, it's a mutual thing. Parents will often tell you that they learned to set out the clothes or to choose the clothes the night before if your child is into the habit of choosing clothes with you, getting everything ready the night before. So you do have to think of each situation and think, what can we do to make this work faster or more efficiently? But all the time thinking about giving approval when you're making progress. And then setting the next level. It was really good the way you put on those clothes today. Now let's see how we can go with eating breakfast so we can get out on time. And at different ages, children have a different or a clearer set of time, a clearer idea of time as well. You know, we have to leave the house by that number on the clock, or we have got 5 minutes to go. Can we do this quickly? Does that answer your question? Okay, are we still there?
Thank you. No, thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Okay,
That's very helpful, Erica.
So think about making sure that when you are setting a limit, there's a good reason for that limit and you're giving the explanation for the limit. Okay, that doesn't mean that it always goes well. What to do when facing resistance or ignoring the message or unwillingness to cooperate. I had to put that there because everything isn't always rosy and straightforward. And the words reflective listening or reflective observation, notice why there is a resistance. Sometimes there is a resistance because there is fear, there's uncertainty, there's anxiety. So just notice what is it in your child that's making them resistant. Sometimes they just need a bit more coaxing, they just need a bit more help. I've given you an example there. The child ignores the message and continues to play. Because you've called the child perhaps for a meal, or it's time to get ready to go to school. I can see that you'd like to finish that game, but we have to leave in 5 minutes. So let's get back to doing it when we get back home from wherever. Okay, so once again, it's acknowledging that the child has a reason for not wanting to do what you have asked, and then you show the child that you've noticed the reason, and you really make some sort of agreement that we'll get back to it when we get home. Really, it's about the reflective listening is really noticing what is it that's going on for that child and acknowledging that you've noticed. And if the resistance continues, then you've got a problem that you want to solve. For this example, it might be that every time, you know, we're playing games, you want to keep playing even when the time's up. So we'll need to think about how we solve that problem.
So Erica, I just wanted to talk to you, and this is something that's come up that I think you talked about it when you were talking about, using soft voice, but often in these situations, children get into this tantrum mode, which is really, kicking and crying, and it gets very anxious for parents in the morning. I mean, I guess it's very distressing to go to studying or, to work after you've had that kind of a big, I call it an episode where there is a tantrum throwing. How do you have any piece of advice for, a parent, how to manage their emotion when when you are giving statements about when children are really not controllable and they're throwing a tantrum?
Yes. Well, I think you gave a hint away there, Rachna. That
Oh, did
really, really, you've got to stop and think that sometimes it's your own anxiety.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to act on that anxiety, and sometimes being reflective after the event gives you an idea of what you might do. For instance, I tell a story of a child. My child, I'm the school psychologist and I'm known at the school, and the child rushes out of the car and says something really rude to me. Do I run across the playground and stop him straight away because you're meant to discipline straight after the event? I decided that was not going to be a good look, running across the playground after, I think it was an 8-year-old child. So I went back to work and I reflected on what happened. And that evening I had a conversation with the child, and there's a long story that goes with it, what were the consequences and so on. But basically, the tantrum does upset you as a parent because you feel out of control.
Okay.
So basically, you've got to think, who's in charge of this family? Is it the 4-year-old or is it me? And yes, it is upsetting when children cry. It is upsetting when children behave badly in a public place. But you've got to remember that you have to take charge. And taking charge with young children is a lot easier than with older children. So these are good, important habits and practices to develop in the family. But yes, I do think you've got to think about what caused the tantrum. Is there some way we could have stopped that acceleration? Because a tantrum is often an acceleration. It gets louder and louder, and you get more and more out of control. So really, you've got to think about, how can I take charge of this situation? And often it's when you are in a hurry. You're in a hurry because you have to get to work as well. So perhaps that example I gave you with the 8-year-old might be something to think about. Yeah. You've got to take charge. You've got to pick up the child. You've got to get going. And then you tackle the problem when you get home.
Thank you, Erica. That's good. Very helpful.
I think that's really the way that you might need to handle that one. Okay, I'm going to show you the 6-step problem solving model. And it's the same problem solving that I would use with managers, with leaders, with teachers, with parents. And really what you want to do is just think of the steps in most situations. It's an evidence-based approach. It's used in all sorts of situations. And who's involved depends on the problem and the setting. But I imagine today we're talking about young children. So we want to be thinking about problems that might be relevant to young children. Okay, what is the problem? Shall we try that problem of not throwing a tantrum just when you're about to leave the house? What can we, what are the possible ways of dealing with it? Think about what we can do. This one, you could do it with the child, you might do it with your partner, or you might do it in your own head. Choose what you're going to do, plan and take action, and then check if it has worked. Okay, I've given you a problem here rather than the tantrum one. They don't want to clean up the toys. That's a common one. By the way, I've gone into preschool and preps and so on, and the children are very good at cleaning up their toys. So one of the advices I give to parents is often look at what happens in the school setting. What are the strategies that teachers use? Teachers often have very, very good strategies. And one of the things that I learned in a kindergarten was a little song packing up can be lots of fun. So there are different strategies that different schools or teachers might use that are helpful, or other parents might use. Now, talking to other parents can be helpful. It can also be problematic. If you've got another friend who gets everything just right with their child and makes you feel inadequate, it might not be so helpful. But overall, finding out what others do, and we find in our parenting programs, one of the greatest value is bringing parents together, where that parents realize that most parents have similar problems and have tried different approaches or solutions. So this approach is the problem-solving approach. I don't want to clean up the toys. The problem is, or the possible solution is, you can leave a mess. You can stand over the child. You can make an agreement for help. And you can evaluate this with or without the child. Think about the pros and cons of each solution, and you can engage the child in a conversation. What if we leave a mess like that? Someone might trip all over the toys. We'll have a very messy house. You'll find that 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds can give you lots of evaluations. What if I stand over you and force you to do it? And so on. What if we do it together? So you choose a solution and you make an agreement. And it could be, I pick up one toy, you pick up another toy. Or you start, I go join you. Or it could be with 2 siblings and so on. This could be with more than one person in the problem solving. And then you take a plan of action, and then you check if it worked. For instance, we haven't got time to clean up the mess today, or we didn't have time to clean up this mess before we went to school. So you might actually go through this step when you come home and you have got time, when everyone's had something to eat and can think about it. So when we left this morning, we left all the toys scattered all over the house. And I came home and found such a messy house. I nearly fell over the toys. Let's work out what we do about messy toys in the mornings or messy toys in the evenings. It's bedtime and it's always a mess at bedtime and it's time to go to bed. So can you see those 6 steps that could work there? Okay, so really there are, just to recap, here I've just put catch a kid doing something good, the soft voice versus the loud voice. Thinking of yourself as a role model. You know, if you're a tidy parent, it's very likely the child may be tidy. The other thing to think about is that all children are not the same. And families are have a dynamic. And some of the parents who might be listening to this presentation might have 2 or 3 children, and one child is very good at tidying up. Another child might be very good at helping you make dinner. And so once again, it's trying to acknowledge that every child is different, and maybe the negotiation has to be with the individual child about an individual situation. So keep that in mind, that all children are not the same. The other thing that's important is the children do like one-on-one time, because Rashna, you raised the issue that's happened this week with children perhaps not being so happy to go back to school.
Right.
Often it's because they valued the one-on-one time with the parent. So that could be another situation where you want to be alert and set up a time for one-on-one with the child, especially if you have multiple children. And a lot of parents do that well.
Just coming on that, Erica, you know, I mean, I guess I don't have the experience, but I always see, you know, being cautious about, I've noticed at very many family gatherings, parents are quite openly discuss, you know, I think the different strengths of their children quite openly with strangers. And just any comments on that, because I've been at family dinners or other places where parents give a bit of a ranking to the 1, 2, and 3 of who's good at this and who's not good at that. What are your comments, particularly in when you talked about strength-based approach, how to be mindful of that behavior and, you know, its impact on children?
Yes, I think that's an interesting one. And we really need to remember that there are also differences in terms of cultures and communities where academic strengths might be valued very highly in one community. In another community, it might be much more creative strengths. And I think you need to really be mindful of the notion of this competitiveness. Now, when I talk about social learning, I also want parents to think about the fact that sometimes these conversations are going around with their child in the environment. If you're thinking about parents who might be playing in the playground with their children on the weekend and are having these conversations, little children have big ears. Their hearing is so much better than adult hearing. So you've got to be really very mindful how you have these conversations, that children might become very aware that they're being ranked and compared. And that's really very important to take note of. But I think, Rashna, if you're talking about adult-only conversations. It can be very competitive amongst parents, especially as the children get older and there are performance indicators that they are talking about. And I know that for some children, this is a very, very sensitive issue that they don't want to disclose their results or their successes.
Thank you, Erica. That's very helpful. I think it's a good reminder for all parents of being watchful of our own behavior.
Yeah, and look, I haven't used the word respect today, but really, maybe that should be the overriding message, that we need to respect children's sensitivities, their opinions. And whilst I'm saying that parents need to be in charge, that's very important. But if you're sitting one-on-one with this child, it's much more, you're much more recognizable that you're respecting each other, you're respecting their opinion, and you are listening to them. So I haven't put the PowerPoint on the PowerPoint, the listening activities, but the listening is most probably the most basic skill that we need to think about. There was a mention of reflective listening and reflective observation. And reflective listening, in very simple terms, is you are noticing what the child is saying, the words, and how they're feeling, what's behind the words. I don't want to go to school today. And really, depending on the tone in which the child says it, whether it's a whiny tone, whether it's a very anxious, upset tone, you really need to be listening to both the words and the emotions and observe all the expressions that go with it. So you're recognizing what's at the bottom of what that child is feeling. So when you're setting limits, and just to go back to the boundaries and the limits, you want to have a very good reason for setting those boundaries and limits. You also, and giving a reason for them is very important, but also then noticing how the child is reacting to those limits. Maybe they were age appropriate, maybe they were not age appropriate. So you want to be really noticing the reaction, and maybe there is some room for negotiation. For instance, the screen time or the technology time might be the one that is the most common one today. And maybe you've set a limit and that is not suitable for the child, or the child wants to push the limits. We often hear about pushing the limits, and I gave you that example of wanting 2, 3, 4 books tonight. So you want to actually then stop and negotiate. So sometimes limits can be changed after consideration and reflection, but listening to children, observing children is very, very important. And I suppose the strengths notion and catching a kid doing something good, soft voice versus loud voice, this is really the same as you reflecting on what you're doing as a parent. And I remember mentioning the word social learning. We are role models for our children. And sometimes we wish our children could be better than we are. So really think about what is it that you're doing as a parent? What are the limits that you do need to set? How are you going to set them? Are they going to be made explicit with an I statement? and whether they're going to be negotiated, because there's room for negotiation and problem solving. Okay, I just put these last few questions on for you, and I think we must be very close to running out of time. So
Yes.
most of us have learned something about ourselves during lockdown, and maybe it is what gets us upset, what gets us anxious. When Rashna, you mentioned the tantrum example, sometimes what our children do in public gets us upset. I gave you the example of the kid running across the playground and me being embarrassed. So what did you learn about yourself during lockdown? What did you learn about your child during this period or homeschooling? And perhaps thinking about, having learned or thought about those things, is there something that I would do differently? So I wanted to put those questions out to the audience, because I think, you know, we all talk about wanting things to be perhaps a bit better after this experience that we've had during the past, it's almost 3 months now. Okay, and I wanted to just show you those 3 books, because there are lots of parenting books, but really when you want to think in terms of boundaries or limits, there's, you know, Google, and you'll get a lot of quick answers and ideas. But also Dr. Lee Waters' book, The Strength Switch, Our Family's Coping book, has most of the things I've talked about in that book, with lots of examples and worksheets and things that you can sort of reflect on and do. And Kathy Walker is also someone who does a lot of talks on parenting. And I imagine, without buying Kathy Walker's book, and Dr. Lee Waters has a very exciting website, you'll get a lot more hints and ideas than I perhaps have shared with you in this short period of time.
Thank you, Erica. I mean, I found this really, we have also been running some sessions on good communication, and, you know, I think they're also interrelated and so valuable. But I think the most important thing for us to know is that, you know, that each one of us have we never know the best and the perfect way to kind of parent, but I think being reflective and trying to, I think I like the idea that you said, which was really, you know, each one of us reflect on our own parenting styles and our children's needs and their strengths, and that's kind of really adds a lot of you know, reassurance that, you know, as we are going on through this journey of parenting, that there are parts of it which will work, but then parts of it which, you know, you can reflect and kind of give your child a better experience, or the child will always, you know, require some kind of disciplining, and that doesn't mean that you're a bad parent, but it's a part of parenting. So I think they're very valuable messages. And once again, from GSA, we want to thank you for your time. And these sessions are so valuable, just to let the viewers know that, you know, these sessions are all recorded, and they are posted on our blog web section of the website. And they kind of pretty much are there within 24 hours from the recording. So take the time to, you know, even when you have those difficult moments, I think, to give yourself a bit of me time and watch a part of these workshops, because apart from, you know, having a busy lifestyle, I think sometimes listening to these sessions or listening to people like Erica can often feel, you know, this journey is not something that you're having on your own. You have other people in the same process or in, it happens to every parent or every carer of a child. And I think the beauty of it, they just help you to become better people. So thank you, Erica. We definitely appreciate your support and your expertise that you have offered in the grad chat programs in the month of May. Thank you very, very much.
It's a pleasure, and all the very best for the rest of the year, which is proving to be a very different one.
I totally agree on that. So just moving on to just the week ahead, we have just a couple of minutes left. We have had a wonderful week this week. We started off with actually a workshop on governance, and we talked about the journey of our General Secretary Madeline Johnson, who will be finishing up her term this in a couple of weeks. And, to understand the journey of a young person in a leadership role was, I think, very enlightening, because I think it's very aspirational to understand leadership is kind of transferable all across in our life, even as a parent. And yesterday, I think we had the session on the effective communication part 2, which was talking a lot about what Erica was discussing about the INU statements, the management of conflict at a workplace, being able to understand, where do you use communication and negotiation sometimes to resolve issues, where do you have to mediate or arbitrate, and sometimes things just go beyond your control and you have to litigate. And often parents have this difficult situation of dealing, finding themselves in a broken down relationships to having to deal with a court system, which can be very, very stressful. So again, tomorrow we have academic support coming up, as well as we are exploring some legal information from AMSU Legal. So I cannot believe it. We've actually come to the end of May, and we'll be rolling off to the month of June. So in the month of June, we are aware that your children may be back at school. Most of the children, or even students, will have a strategic, well thought of return to campus plan put forward by the university. And I think it's very important for us to be mindful, to be respectful, and to ensure that we also play a part in supporting a large cohort returning back to the university when and as required, as decided by the university. So I guess for us at GSA, we're going to be focusing a lot on how best students can be supported with exam support. So we have our representation team who will be coming to talk a little bit about how study buddy groups can be set up online to support you with preparing for exams. We are planning to run some sessions with using the exams, the academic support from Stop 1 to talk about how to prepare for online exams, how to prepare with, how to deal with anxiety and stress during exam period. A lot of the other activities that GSA will be dealing with in relation to providing you support with our 1-800-GSA helpline, but also social events to look after your emotional health and mental health. But apart from that, we also recognize that we have been informed that, there's been a big spike in family violence, and we would like to work with our partner agencies in our community to get guest speakers on recognizing when there is family violence in our homes or your community, or if you have been impacted by family violence, how do you recognize family violence? We'll run a session on what kind of support is available for you to access. Then we will be talking to someone from the legal sector about what are the laws in relation to family violence. And the fourth one is really about understanding that, family violence is an aspect, but remaining safe for yourself and the community is also important. and violence at any other place is not acceptable. So we have an exciting kind of topics that we'll be discussing in these grad chat programs. And also to just let people know that GSA will be continuing with our webinars till the end of the year, to the end of this calendar year, as a part of, as we found that we've got very positive feedback from. So as we move on to face, we just want to let students know that this will continue to be here. And I know that Tavita has joined us. Tavita, I am sorry, we kind of ran out of time, but is there anything else that you would like to join and add to what I have provided information?
Thanks, Rachna. You've done well to spell out all our activities over the coming months. I think one of the big aspects too for GSA is that we work in partnership with our grad groups. And so even yesterday we had Meditate run a meditation session for our students, and we're looking to work closely with them over the coming weeks to support students through mindfulness activities during exams and when assessments are due. So that's happening in the background as well. And you've mentioned all our partners. So we're looking forward to a big week and a big month ahead for GSA to interact and support our grad students. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tavita and Erica. And I hope all the parents have a wonderful week this week and give a lot of cuddles and reassurance to the little babies who've been back at school. So it's goodbye from me and look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.